and public health, a climate issue, and a campaign finance issue. So we're extremely fortunate that our panel discussion, we're going to have some preeminent voices from the community level to experts in all these areas. And first, I'd like to bring up our filmmaker, director, producer, Steve Cowan, to hear a little bit about the making of the film. Please join us. And we're not going to do an intermission, so if you need to take a break, please feel free.
Test.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Hey.
Well, it's so nice to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here. I totally salute the work the people in this room are doing.
And I forgot, that was going to be the first thing. If you were in the movie, can you identify yourself? There are many of us here. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. You're fantastic, and this really showcased it. And we're going to get to have some of you speak after this, too. So, Steve.
Yes, Phoebe.
How did you end up here in southwestern Pennsylvania making this movie? Most
of the documentaries we've done over the years have been ocean-related. I have a huge love for the ocean, and I grew up by it. And so we did a bunch of films about ocean fisheries, having to do with destructive fishing practices, overfishing, et cetera. And we went all over the world. And on one of these trips, we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean between Indonesia and the Philippines on a big ferry. We were just changing locations. And the cinematographer, Barry, I was asleep down on a bunk in a berth, and he came down and woke me up. It was morning. And he goes, "Get up here, you won't believe this." And so I went up on the deck, and as far as the eye could see, in all directions, horizon to horizon, there was floating plastic. And it was apocalyptic, disturbing to see that there'd be that much plastic out there. And that's years ago. And so that made an impression. But as to how I ended up in Pennsylvania, again, one of these fisheries-related films we were working on, we ended up in the Gulf of Mexico, or whatever you want to call that Gulf these days, on shrimp boats with shrimp fishermen who are trying to shrimp in a less destructive way, catching sea turtles, et cetera. And while out there, these shrimp fishermen told us about this dead zone that develops every year there from all of the fertilizers and chemical pesticides coming down the Mississippi River into the Gulf. So we thought we'd go upriver and meet some of these farmers that are growing these commodity crops, which is millions of acres growing corn and soybeans and wheat. These are commodity crops, which means they're subsidized. So these farmers get subsidy checks, generous subsidy checks to grow this stuff. And they're sort of caught in a catch-22 because in order to qualify for the subsidies, they have to get crop insurance. And to get crop insurance, they have to use chemicals. So a lot of them would like to operate organically, but they can't. You know, they've got combines that are worth $500,000 and more. And so they're sort of caught. And these subsidies are created in the federal farm bill that gets renewed every 4 years or so. So we went upstream again, so to speak, to Washington, D.C. to meet some of these members of Congress that sit on the ag committees in the House and the Senate who basically make the farm bill. They write it. And it didn't take us long, again through opensecrets.org and as a database, to see that these particular members who write the farm bill get the bulk of their election campaign money from agribusiness and agrochemical business. And so that sort of like informed us of how things work. And so with plastic, all the plastic that's going out into the ocean, we went up the same river, and stopping first in Louisiana, where there's a lot of ethane crackers making plastic, these huge petrochemical facilities that are basically owned by transnational corporations and who were lured there by the offer of subsidies. In this case, it's tax breaks. We went further upstream to the Ohio River into Pennsylvania and saw where the Shell plant was being built. And we went, as you could see in the film, we went and talked to some of the legislators and lobbyists who championed and enabled the whole thing. And it didn't take much digging to see where their money comes from. So that's how we ended up here.
Wonderful. And this was a festival version. How is it different from what is going to air on public television?
Yeah, because in large part because of the election and the outcome of it, I kind of got to be careful what I say here. Is anyone out there from PBS? No.
This is being recorded, so.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's the thing. They're caught in a bind because they're afraid of getting their funding cut, PBS, NPR, if they're perceived as allowing primetime airplay of a film that would be interpreted as advocacy. So the difference between what we just saw and our version for PBS is that they just said, hey, pull the animations. It's the animations you're editorializing. So just keep straight with your journalism and drop the editorializing. And so we did that, and now they're okay with it, but they're nervous nonetheless.
Thank you. Was there, what was that? Okay. Oh, the animation. Oh, they're saying the animations were great.
Great, yeah, I think they're great too. Headgear Animation in Toronto did the visuals, and a guy named Travis McGrain, who I'm in a band with in Oregon, who's a gifted songwriter and performer, he did all the music.
Was there anything that surprised you about filming here in Pennsylvania as you were making it? Well, guys like Mike Terzi, I mean, just seeing some of this footage, we didn't actually, well, in some cases we had cameras in the House and in the Senate in Harrisburg, but a lot of that where these politicians are holding forth about the benefits of agrochemical and plastic, or not agrochemical, but petrochemical and plastic. That's what surprised me, is that they were just pretending, turning a deaf ear to everybody else, you know, and they're really. When I talk to them, I would say, I even brought up their funding. I'd say, well, hey, you get a huge hunk of your funding from natural gas or petrochemical, and typically they would say, oh, that doesn't affect my vote a bit, you know. This is for jobs. This is for jobs. This is for the people. I mean, so that they're kind of stuck in that. Whether they're sincere or not, I think some can be, but they're still sort of head in the mud. They're not looking at the big picture, and that surprised me. What do you hope comes from this film?
Well, I'm hoping they don't pull it off the air, but I'm hoping that it energizes people to get involved. I mean, like some of the people in the film saying, basically, as in France, there's legislation to at least deal with the policy side of things. You know, this dumb policy that creates these problems. And so I'm hoping that citizens get more involved.
Well, speaking of citizens, yes, thank you. Thanks for making the film. You stay here. Yeah. Thanks for making the film. Speaking of citizens getting more involved, we have some amazing panelists to add to the discussion. How about let's have you come on over. Oops, sorry. Or stay there. That's fine
Terrie,
too.
get up here.
Yeah.
Terrie.
And
Yep.
Matt is going to introduce our panelists one by one.
Yeah. Well, one more round of applause for Steve for all of his excellent work. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And please stay with the panel and participate in the conversation.
Sure.
So we are fortunate to have distinguished panelists who have appeared in the film and have been active with us here in southwestern Pennsylvania working on a lot of these issues. So I'm going to call the panel up, do a brief introduction, and then we'll have some Q&A with the panelists, and then there will be time for Q&A with the audience as well, too. So start thinking of some good questions. So first I'd like to welcome, and by the way, everyone, please be careful coming up on the stage here, Dr. Ned Ketyer, who is a pediatrician and president of Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania. He is a resident of Washington County, the most heavily fracked county in the Commonwealth. Ned is a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health and Climate Change. He recently joined a newly formed group called PSNAP, which stands for Physician and Scientist Network Addressing Plastic and Health, to help educate health providers and the public about this urgent public health issue. So welcome, Dr. Ned. Thank you for joining. Next, I'd like to invite Terrie Baumgartner. Terrie has devoted much of her life to protecting the health and environment of communities in Beaver County. She's been an outreach organizer for Clean Air Council for the past 5 years and is a founding board member of Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community BCMAC. Thank you, Terrie, for being here tonight. And next, I'd like to invite Dr. Terrie Collins. He's originally from New Zealand. Dr. Collins is a pioneer of sustainability science at Carnegie Mellon. He is the Teresa Hines Professor of Green Chemistry and the Director of the Institute for Green Science at Carnegie Mellon. Dr. Collins is a pioneer who created the first university course in green chemistry. He was the first scientist invited to advise on the Global Plastics Treaty. He's an entrepreneur working towards a plastic-free future. So thank you very much, Terrie. And then Larry Schweiger. He is the chair of the board of the Climate Reality Action Fund and helped found Climate Reality Project with Vice President Al Gore. He's the former president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation, the former president and CEO of Penn Future, and the former head of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. So what an incredible panel, and thank you so much for being here. So what I'd like to do is start with some very sort of like tangible things to get us kicked off. So I would like to start with Terrie Baumgartner and ask, you were there when they announced the plastic plant and were doing organizing for BCMAC for the public hearings. What was it like at the time that got you started in this work, and what were some of the things that you did? And there's a mic here. You have to pass that.
Okay. Goodness, we've got 14 years of history here, and I'm thinking about that $1.65 billion. I'm thinking about, what we didn't get with it, what we are getting with it. What we didn't get with the jobs, promises of jobs and economic prosperity and economic growth. We have Orvie reports that have disproved that soundly now. And what we did get was the chance to contribute to the global plastic crisis, the acceleration of our climate crisis, and health impacts, which Dr. Ned will talk about. And I could go through a lot of history. I was going to end with the story of the final approval of the plant. Maybe I should jump ahead to that in the interest of time. I don't know.
There's time to come back. It's whatever you would want to cover, so please feel free.
Okay, well let me ease into that then. A few weeks ago, I got a long email from somebody in the middle of the state. I'd never known this person, and the email was about the Shell plant, and the first sentence was, how did this plant get permitted? How did it even get permitted in the first place? And I can tell you it's not because Beaver County residents wanted it. It's not because they were consulted about it. And hopefully I've got a timeline and that story to tell you to show that. But in 2012, there were those tax incentives we saw in the film. We have Pennsylvania chosen, because of those tax incentives, over Ohio and West Virginia for the site of the plant. We have the siting in Potter Township, a community of 500 people. And that was a state-level decision that not even the township was consulted about. They learned about this at a press conference. The earliest pushback after 2012 was from Clean, or at least not the earliest necessarily, but what I saw was an op-ed from Clean Air Council Executive Director Joe Minot about the health impacts of this plant. It was a warning. That was, I think, around 2012. And then a few years later, Clean Air Council put out a 70-page booklet, well-researched, deeply researched, about the health impacts of the plant. But it seemed to go nowhere. In 2014, Shell launched a posh reception for residents at the country club in near my home. And by the way, I live 4.5 miles from the plant. And that was complete with refreshments and the most personable company representatives. And of course, this was a launch of the jobs, jobs, jobs narrative, which would continue 24/7 for the next 8 years, more than 8 years. The promises made of jobs and economic growth were soon amplified by 2 university reports from a local university. Those 2 reports were often, figures from them were often cited by the media without mentioning that they were commissioned by Shell. By 2016, though, there was some opposition surfacing. I could see and feel it both inside and outside Potter Township. And meanwhile, Shell was cultivating relationships with Potter, which held the power to approve or disapprove of the plant's final permit. In the summer of 2016, at a Potter Township meeting, the residents from the town of Beaver, which is part of, it's like the professional center of Beaver County, pleaded with the 3 Potter Township supervisors not to approve that final permit. Their pleas for me, and I saw them on video, I wasn't there, but to me their pleas, they were very passionate and eloquent, and they foreshadowed in that respect the testimonies of so many people to come over the years, but testimonies that often seem to fall on deaf ears. In the fall of 2016, some of us canvassed in the town of Beaver, which is across the river from the plant, the town of Vanport, which is the closest to it, and in Potter Township itself. We were canvassing for a fence line monitoring system around the plant. This was the idea of Clean Air Council. They thought it would provide a measure of protection for resident health. We gathered 750 signatures in those towns, and we presented them to the 3 Potter Township supervisors, but we weren't exactly welcomed. Shell had called the fence line monitoring system unnecessary, and Clean Air Council and Environmental Integrity Project would go on to wage a 2-year legal battle in order to win that system for the plant. At another Potter Township meeting that fall, the room was packed with opposing southwestern Pennsylvania residents who would suffer the plant's impacts, because we all know that toxic air and water contamination doesn't stop at boundaries, whether those are township or county boundaries. But a supervisor opened that meeting with this question: how many of you are from Potter Township? So opposing residents could only hold up signs because they weren't allowed to speak. Finally, in December 2016, the hearing for that plant approval, that final plant approval of the permit came. It was held in the Potter Municipal Building, and it began at 3 p.m. Shell held the floor for 6 hours. So it was 9 p.m. before the opposing residents got to speak. And then at 11 p.m., finally, the legal representatives for the opposition got to speak. And when the hearing ended at 12 a.m., I had to wonder how an 11-hour hearing structured in that way fairly represented the opposition to the plant. That was the first of many experiences that would show me the impact of corporate power on state and local governance, and you can, of course, see it in this terrific film.
Thanks, Terrie. So you talked about some of the health concerns about the Shell plant. Dr. Ned, you've done a lot of work talking about the health impacts of what it's like for residents to live in the proximity of any oil and gas infrastructure. And maybe you have some things you can share with us about some of the health concerns that people should know about.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to, first of all, just reflect back on that film and just how tremendous a film it was. So thank you, Steve. Really well done. Look, I'm a pediatrician. Maybe you're a pediatrician once upon a time. The one thing about me is I don't really compromise on health. I don't think you would want to take your kids to a pediatrician who compromised on health. But we saw a lot of compromising in this film, didn't we? We saw politicians compromising health for jobs, for money, for progress. But there's no job that's worth supporting if it directly threatens the health of your kids and my kids and all kids. And unfortunately, our politicians don't speak the language of science, and they certainly don't respect our health. And that's a problem because there's no secret that fracking for ethane and methane, which are the building blocks of plastic, there's no secret that that is polluting. And we know beyond a reasonable doubt that fracking for oil and gas and cracking for polyethylene scars the landscape, degrades the environment, contaminates the air and water and soil that all of us share. We know that it accelerates climate change. We know that it threatens the health of wildlife and aquatic creatures, of farm animals and even family pets. And we know that fracking and cracking makes people sick. We know this. This is not debatable. It's not controversial to say that. If you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, you know that what you're smelling, what you're seeing, what you're hearing is not good for your health and the health of your children. The chemicals that come out of the ground from fracking, the chemicals that come out of the smokestacks, and the flares when they crack at an ethane cracker plant, you know, a lot of those emissions are invisible. You can't see them except with this special camera. But you can smell them, and you can still see some of the emissions, and they're not good. Particulate matter, volatile organic compounds like benzene, which can cause cancer, and toluene, which causes permanent neurologic damage. And we see this in the community. Formaldehyde, radioactivity in the form of radon gas and radium-226 with a half-life of 1,600 years. And there's more. There's more toxic materials. It's not a secret. The fracking companies know it. The fracking companies know it's dangerous. Shell publishes the chemicals that are of their greatest concern, and there's a whole list of them, many of them carcinogenic. Many of the chemicals are endocrine disrupting chemicals, which in very small concentrations, hijack our immune systems, our endocrine systems, and increase our risk for all sorts of chronic diseases and certain cancers. So it's not a secret that this is bad. I think that's why we're all sitting here. We know that it's bad, and it has to change. This is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for our health, for the environment, for other creatures that we live with on this planet, and it's not sustainable for the climate.
Thank you, Dr. Ned. I wanted to ask a kind of background question, and I'm not sure which of you, maybe Matt, would be the right person to answer. But could you give us a little context on, briefly, why we in Allegheny County should care about the Shell plant? How does that in fact impact our airshed? What are the climate emissions relative to other, things?
Okay, all right, I can do this one. Do you want to take a crack first, and then I'm happy to chime.
I can give a point on that question. Some years ago, we studied the legacy wells in the eastern side of the state, 100,000 of them. Every one that was looked at was leaking. After you sink one of these wells, the industry only stays around while it's producing a lot of gas. And then, of course, they try to close it off, and over time, whatever they did breaks down. And if you were looking from outer space at the United States, focusing on the vibrational spectra of methane, we would light up like a very bright light. We are major contributors to global warming because of that, for example. And that affects us across the board. Of course, it's not just Beaver County or any of the other counties we've heard talked about. It's really the whole world that we're impacting.
So I don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head here tonight, but I do know, for example, the Shell plant contributes a large number of fine particulate emissions, PM 2.5, and we've worked with some air quality scientists, John Graham of Clean Air Task Force, to actually model what that impact is. We've done this recently. So we know, for example, that the Shell plant contributes enough particles that enter Allegheny County that it actually affects the background levels of particles in Allegheny County. It also affects, even more importantly, people who live in Beaver County in proximity to the plant. We know that the state right now is looking at which zones in our state should be considered as being not meeting air quality standards for various pollutants like particles. And they just had a public comment period on that. And the work that we did with this group pointed the fact that that area, so Allegheny County is not meeting those air standards, but the Shell plant is contributing enough of an increment that it should be taken seriously. But Beaver County is now on the cusp of possibly not meeting the air quality standards for fine particles. In fact, the standard is a yearly average of 9 micrograms per cubic meter, and last year, in 2024, the data came in, it's 2023 is the latest certified data, that Beaver County was at 8.9. So it's right on the cusp, and the Shell plant wasn't operating fully throughout 2023. So, we've put in comments to say, look, this non-attainment zone should be expanded. The Shell plant also emits large amounts of hazardous air pollutants, and there's modeling where the zones of concentration are there, and they're at levels that people should be concerned about. The other key piece of this is that it's also warped our government. So the water discharge permits and the air emissions permits that were required for Shell to run the plant to bring it up to speed, they had to warp our permit system. There weren't enough permits for volatile organic compounds available in our airshed. And so they pushed the state government, the DEP, to allow the substitution of nitrogen oxide emission permits for VOC permits. That's not how the trading system's supposed to work, but they warped that. They also warped the water discharge permit process. They basically grandfathered that plant in under old permits that were there for when that site was a zinc smelter. And the reason why they wanted to do that was because if they could grandfather them in, the emission levels were higher than what the more updated standards for discharges in rivers and streams are. And so they warped the DEP's process there. And so all of this affects, you know, our airshed here in Allegheny County and in all in southwestern Pennsylvania. So I don't know if that's
Thank you,
what
yes.
you were asking for.
Well, and that dovetails into one of the major themes of the movie was the undue influence of money in our government systems. And Larry Schweiger, among your many other accomplishments, you've written an entire book on the climate crisis. You wrote it 4 or 5 years ago on climate crisis and corrupt politics. Would you like to respond to any of this?
Well, first of all, I'd like to share a story to give you some hope about the future. I'm sure everyone in this room understands the incredible situation we face nationally with the recent election. The film describes Mike Terrie as the former Speaker of the House. I'd like to tell you the story about how he became the former Speaker of the House. Speakers are, and I used to work in the legislature for 10 years, so I know a little bit about this. They pick speakers from safe districts so that they can do whatever they damn well want to do without any political pressure. And Mike Terrie was from a rock-solid Republican district in Allegheny County. It was actually several townships in northern Allegheny County, including Panelist, where I live. So Terrie does the deal. He gets all this money, and incidentally, a lot more than what shows up, because he has several PACs that are pumping money into lawmakers. And he's the guy that divvies up the money to the people who are going to vote for this nonsense. So anyway, Terrie also took a check for $60,000 from a large company that we all know that wanted to build a large shopping center in McCandless. And this company gave him the money. He then got all of his cronies in Allegheny County, McCandless Township, to work on this deal of putting in a new Walmart on a 2-lane highway right next to North Park. And so we organized an effort to challenge this, and I talked my daughter into running for one of the key offices in the township, and my other daughter fought it over in her township. At any rate, we ended up flipping the entire McCandless Township to such a degree. In fact, Terrie spent probably $20,000 or more to try to defeat my daughter against his chief of staff, who worked for him about 10 years. And he found a photograph of Al Gore with my daughter, because our families have been friends since they were little. And anyway, he took this photograph of my daughter and Al and darkened it down so it looked really very suspicious. And at any rate, I called Al up and I told him about it. He said, "I hope I don't hurt your daughter." I said, "I don't know, we'll see." So anyway, we ended up having the largest turnout, and she had the most successful election in the entire county of Allegheny at that time. And so Terrie gets a clear message, because all the candidates that he was backing all lost. And he got the message from the most populous township in his district that he was in trouble. And so he decided to not run again and ended up working for a gas company, which we all knew was going to happen. But anyway, that's how we beat Terrie. And the point that I want to make is that we need to march in the streets, but we also need to register the people to vote. We also need to be knocking on doors. We need to turn around this country, and the only way to do that is at the local level. And so I would challenge each and every one of you to be a part of this fight that we have going forward to save this democracy and to deal with the plastic pollution and the climate pollution that we're dealing with. Thank you.
That's great. So, Dr. Collins, so can you talk about why the petrochemical system is not sustainable, what's so wrong about it, and what are some alternatives for us?
Well, I'd like to start also with an optimistic story, if I may, and I'll circle around specifically to that question. So I teach chemistry and sustainability at Carnegie Mellon University, and what I ask the students to do is to read epic books that are appropriate to sustainability. Often they're about corporate corruption that ends up killing people on mass scale. They're also about things, Our Stolen Future, about endocrine disruption, something that everybody everywhere should know about, and another thing we need to escape. About the rapid decline in sperm count in the human population. And then I ask them, well, what do you think about it? And then I personally grade the essays. And the one thing I can say about us is we're a healthy species in the sense of the brilliance of the students in, first of all, their concern, their reactions, and what they hope for that they can contribute to fixing the problems. So then, when you really look from this perspective, if we don't solve these problems, our civilization dies. When it comes to endocrine disruption, our species is going to be massively curtailed. We're losing mean sperm count in highly chemicalized societies like the United States, more than 1% per year. So if you look from 1973 till 2011, we lost over 50% of mean sperm count. Humans used to be very fertile. And it's like your kidneys. You have a more than you need activity, but you arrive at a point when suddenly it crashes and it doesn't work anymore. So 1 in 6 couples today cannot have a child the old-fashioned way. If you plot sperm count out into the future based on the lines that we have, the sperm count's asymptotically approaching 0 by 2045. That's the young children being born today, the young males. There's also all sorts of complications with female reproductive health, and reproduction is where we have, with males, it was where we have the best quality information. So we talk about that, hard and all as it is, but it's a whole range of health impacts. This is being caused by chemical pollution. When each of you go to the bathroom, you will excrete bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is a fantastically dangerous substance associated with plastics. You will excrete it at the concentrations that cause massive damage to the reproductive tracts of rodents and God knows what. And so if we do not deal with these problems, then American civilization is on the way out quite rapidly. And so I, of course, agonize about this all the time. It's bone-chilling in a way that you can't believe. I believe the universities, I've lived in universities my entire career, 45 years of teaching, they have really let the American population down. By and large, their object is to function and perform to the gallery of a failing system. We have a failing system. If we can fix plastics, if we can do the right thing, there's incredible hope. If we can fix energy, there's incredible hope. And we can. We saw it in the movie. The answer's right there. I can give you all the logic of why going solar will save American civilization, and sticking with this nonsense with oil, coal, and natural gas will destroy it very quickly. And so we really this should be talked about everywhere, taught about everywhere. And unfortunately, because it's bad for money for the people who have the money now, it's not a problem of not having money, it's just you're going to get your money another way. The people who control the money now are blocking this happening, and they're suffocating the institutions of the United States and the world that ought to be addressing these issues on steroids. Thank you.
Quite a statement. So would anyone like to chime in on any of the topics? Yeah, sure.
In addition to the horrendous things that we've just heard, if you Google PJM and price, you'll find that the price of energy, because gas is being used for 60% of the energy in Pennsylvania today, where when I was involved in Harrisburg, it was almost zero. But that gas price is going to skyrocket, and it's going to drive the price of electricity and gas. Some of you may have seen it in your gas bills. But we're going to see a very large boost in costs to the average consumer in the next 2 years. So look up the projections that the PJM is putting out about the future. You'll be shocked, as I was. So we have 2 reasons to do this.
Yeah, I just want to say that I talked a little bit about fracking, which is the cradle of plastic in our lives. I talked about cracking, which is the manufacture of the nurdles that then go to plastics plants. But let's talk about plastic and how plastic is poisoning us. We've heard about endocrine disruption. Plastic affects us in 2 ways. One of them is physical, the other is chemical. Physically, in the last 5 years, researchers have found microplastics, which are tiny bits of plastic under 5 millimeters. They have found microplastics everywhere they look in the human body, in every organ, including the brain and the heart and the placenta. They've even found plastic in babies' first stools, which shows us that babies are being born pre-polluted. Then there's the chemical poisoning that's happening. Plastics are made with a variety. In fact, there are 16,000 chemicals associated with plastics. Only a handful are not toxic. In fact, most of them, they don't even know if they're toxic or not. And a full quarter of the chemicals used in plastics are highly toxic, some of them carcinogenic, as I mentioned, and some as endocrine disruptors. These chemicals are at very low concentrations, affecting our reproductive systems as we speak, as Terrie just mentioned, the decline of fertility, the decline of sperm counts. Cancer rates, chronic illnesses are increasing in the United States in the past 35 years. And why do I mention 35 years? Since 1990, humans have created more than 75% of all the plastic ever made has been in the past 35 years. So, Steve, you mentioned the Philippines. I lived in the Philippines for 3 years in the early 80s. They didn't have plastic pollution back then. This is all in my adult lifetime. So for the young folks sitting here looking at me and people of my generation, yeah, we kind of blew it. And we're looking to you to fix it because, you know, we don't seem to be fixing it anytime soon.
So to pick up on that, we live in a money-first civilization. We have to live in a sustainability-first civilization. That's the conversion that we've got to make. Is it doable? Absolutely. See, we've only really had chemistry. I love chemistry. I'm a chemist. It's incredibly fascinating. You could do amazingly wonderful good things with it, and a whole lot of things that have turned out to be very bad. It started in 1856, the corporation as we know it, with the first commercial dye produced in London by a 17-year-old who went and patented it in his father's garage, and that began what became the imperial chemical industry of Great Britain at the time. We've only had oil since it's either August 26 or 27, 1859, and it was discovered 100 miles north of here in Titusville, Pennsylvania. We've only had this stuff and everything that's in this room, etc., that we see, the paint, the carpets, you name it, for a bit over, around 170 years. And we have a lot of growing up to do to understand how to control that power and how to make it good power as opposed to bad power. We commercialize chemicals because of technical performance and cost performance. Every chemical's got a health performance. Every chemical's got an environmental performance, and every chemical has a fairness performance. We have to learn how to quantify those and integrate them into the value proposition of chemicals, and we need a government that gets this through its head very quickly. But it can be done, theoretically anyway. You can imagine this working. So my hope is that we'll get on with it, and if we tackle plastics successfully, that will be a huge step.
I'd like to, you mentioned the fact that we discovered oil here in Pennsylvania. The first fracking actually occurred by none other than John Wilkes Booth. Some of us don't know that, but John Wilkes Booth drilled a well in up near Oil City and dropped dynamite down the well to frack it, and it ended up blowing the well shut. He lost his first oil well, but in fact, John Wilkes Booth was the father of fracking in the world.
Yes, and by the way, fracking is a term for an expletive four-letter word beginning with F. It's an old word for that, if you didn't know.
So we'll be taking questions in just a minute. I just want to follow up with Terrie Baumgartner. You know, what has been the track record of the Shell plant? And you wanted to complete your story about, you know, what it was like at the hearing as well, too.
I'm trying to, well, let me address the first question. Oh, okay. So track record of the cracker. We're talking about the second biggest emitter of VOCs in the state. Within 3 months after the startup of the cracker, it had exceeded its 12-month rolling emissions standards, or what was allowed by the permit. So in 3 months' time, we had blown past annual limits. And those were for volatile organic compounds and carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide. And since today, I think this is an up-to-date count, but since the beginning or the startup of the plant, there have been 31 notices of violation. That's how many times the plant violated its permit. And 73, and I really think it's more than 73, malfunctions. So that's an abysmal startup record. And you know, there's been one incident after another. Probably one of the most memorable was in April of 2023, when 219 pounds of benzene were released over the fence line into the community around the plant. Benzene is a carcinogen. That was 21 times the report triggering threshold for benzene. So we had, in May of 2023, we have Clean Air Council and Environmental Integrity Project joining in a lawsuit about those violations. We have, in May of 2023, we have the plant, though, continuing to operate because of the subsidies. And we have a $10 million fine that Shell was penalized for those violations through that $10 million fine. But as Matt has said, That's basically the price of a parking ticket for this industry. So that's some of the record of the plant. You may know more. Finishing the story, well, the plant was permitted. We had to come back in January because there was a little wrinkle. Had to do with the pipeline, not the plant. And in January, we were all hopeful that maybe there was another chance for that permit to be denied, and it was not. It was approved. Did I finish the story?
Yeah, no,
Is there
I
more?
thought there might have been more from before, but I think
Yeah,
you had finished it
yeah.
from before. But thanks for those updates. There's more to this story, but we'll come to that for what people can do before you leave here tonight and going forward. So we don't want to leave people in a position where you feel like you can't do anything, because there is a lot that you can do. So we'll be following up on that in a second. But we do want to open up the Q&A to the audience. You may have some good questions for our amazing panelists here. So who would like to ask a question?
Here, let me go first. In that permitting process, I don't need a mic. In that permit process, is there anything as improbable or impossible that it may seem, is there any part of the permit that allows for it to be simply revoked by law? There has to be language in there somewhere.
Well, the law, if I might use the mic here. The law, but whether you're looking at the clean water law or the clean air waters, if you have enough violations, they can be penalized. But it requires the state of Pennsylvania and others to be diligent in monitoring and tracking and making the case for a permit revocation. It's harder. You're going to end up probably getting more fines than you will anything else. That's generally how these things play out. But it is technically possible to revoke your permit.
Yeah, and social license as well, too. I mean, part of what Shell has done by having all these violations and being fined and being constantly in the news is the community support has significantly eroded over time, to the point where actually they replaced all of their North American, Western Pennsylvania staff. And, well, Pheobe can comment on this, about what the new Shell person said at a public meeting at the Carnegie Science Center. It was something along the lines of, we're here now, you have to deal with us. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to try to meet you halfway, or no, it's like, we're here now, you have to deal with us. A complete kind of about-face of the sunny presentation that was provided, you know, during the public hearing, during the permit process.
I'll just add that from the beginning, Shell said it was going to be a good neighbor. Some people have said, if you don't like the plant, you should just move. I don't think that's really fair. As for policy, I'd like to see us do something to tie the subsidies that go to this industry to compliance. That tie needs to be stronger. Something needs to happen at that policy level.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel this huge disconnect. This has been a fabulous program. We have the evidence, we have the knowledge, we have the science, we have the medicine, we have the illness. And we, in the last month, I imagine everybody in this room is of the relatively same political persuasion. You know, they'll be good neighbors. I mean, what are we talking about in terms of political clout? It's not our knowledge. My knowledge is missing, but your knowledge and the knowledge of the world isn't missing. But in terms of having the political clout of prevailing in a society which is on the rule of law is on the verge of collapsing. Things can be tied up forever, but the optimism, I would love to hear, it's not how smart we are, it's how ethical we are as a people, all of us, somehow we're not making the difference. And I don't ask miracles from you to say, here's how you do it, Maggie. But it feels the incredible battle that you put on in Beaver County, you know, going back 14 years. What would you do today to do that?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I mean, I think we did so many of the right things. It just seemed to fall on, so much seemed to fall on deaf ears.
Well, they were very good ears compared to what they are now.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me give you a story from history. Many years ago, there was a lawmaker by the name of John Laudadio from Westmoreland County who was sick and tired of the coal industry polluting all the rivers and streams near his home. He lived in Westmoreland County. And John decided to run for the state legislature, and he organized the Sportsmen of Pennsylvania to back him and to get change. And he ended up, when he became a Democratic member of the House, he became a real force, and he cut a number of lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, taking money from the coal industry, and he put on a campaign, and he ended up flipping the State House in 1969, 68, 69, in that period, and ended up changing the direction of the state legislature. And that's when we wrote the constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to clean air and pure water and the preservation of natural. And John was one of those sponsors, and he changed the game. And I think what we really need to do is to get organized, not just to go out and march occasionally, but to get organized and to be changing people's minds, getting people registered to vote, and getting them out to vote. This is about the hard part of the job, and it's about knocking on doors. I can tell you I've knocked on a lot of doors for my daughter and for the candidates that were in McCandless, and I've done the same thing in other places. But we need to start doing that. As the environmental community has been good at sending a letter to the lawmaker or pushing here and there, but they have been actually rigging the system against us. And we need to push back and play hardball politics. So I'm no longer in a nonprofit, so I can say this without any blemish. It is time to get mobilized because we're losing our nation, and we're losing these incredible important battles like plastic because we're not pushing hard enough. We're not engaging in the politics of this nation.
Let me just add that in the film, there were a couple of champions in the Pennsylvania legislature who were featured. Katie Muth, Representative Rabb. There are fantastic elected people in Allegheny County, in Pennsylvania, but there aren't enough. There aren't enough. A lot of us, understand the science. A lot of us understand the predicament we're in, but not enough of us do. So we all have to get out. And as Larry said, we've got to knock on doors. We've got to talk to our neighbors, and we've got to educate them, and we have to listen to them as well.
And consider running for office yourself. Another question?
I have so many questions, but I'll try and limit it. I just want to make a comment first about the first question and what was just mentioned about the right to clean air and clean water in our Constitution and Pennsylvania. To me, that is the clearest legal path towards getting plants like these shut down, is to litigate it and take it to the courts. My question for the panel is, we have such a breadth of knowledge here, from the medical field to community organizing, storytelling, media, education and innovation, and politics. As a young person who's trying to make a difference, I wonder what your experience is, how you feel you have made a good difference, or anything you can point to in that direction, as well as what I see, what the kind of conclusion of the movie was being about finance and politics, and the Citizens United decision, and trying to reverse that. Is that the penultimate, or is there smaller things? What do you see your impact as?
Let me share a personal story. Back when the BP oil spill occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, I flew down there literally within 24 hours of the spill, and was I rented all I was with National Wildlife at the time. We rented all the vessels who were normally out fishing. They couldn't go out to fish because of the pollution. So we hired all the crews to take out the media to show you what was going on in the Gulf. And I later had an opportunity to testify before Congress to take the oil spill penalties that BP spent and put those towards cleaning up the Gulf of Mexico, that dead zone that you talked about. And we ended up getting it done. Mary Landrieu was our chief sponsor. She was the senator from Louisiana. And Mary was always she always voted for the oil industry at every turn. But we convinced her to do this, and she ended up losing her election over this effort that she diverted the money from the oil pollution fund into the cleanup of the Gulf of Mexico. But we are currently working in that region now to clean up the spills and clean up the problems that are there. But the battle is not over. Al Gore recently shared with me, that the Trump administration eliminated the rules for environmental justice issues that Al and the late Senator or Congressman from the South, John, I'm blanking on his last name at this moment. Anyway, they were able to get this legislation passed, and it's been put aside. So all the pollution that occurred in the toxic areas of the Louisiana, the so-called Cancer Alley, are not protected the way they once were because of the recent rulemaking and pullback from the Trump administration. So there's a lot of work to be done. There are people all over this country that can work together, but we must get better organized. We must work hard at the politics, and it's time. We show up with a wiffle ball bat when they're playing hardball, and it's time to bring the hardball bat to the ball game, because it's time to win these battles, and if we don't, our children will pay a terrible price. John Lewis was the name I was missing.
I think that's a tremendous question. It's a very complex one to answer. We need to be solutions focused. That's what we do. In fact, the company that is based on the intellectual property that I generated, we miniaturized the enzymes that are in our livers for breaking things down and made them far more powerful than the enzymes, such that they react with hydrogen peroxide at dazzlingly low concentrations to remove endocrine disrupting compounds from water, municipal wastewater, industrial water, any kind of water. And it's by far the easiest and cheapest way to go. And while we were doing it, we engaged with really world-leading endocrine disruption scientists to make sure that what we were making were not going to be just out of the frying pan into the fire. And the news there is really good. So we focus in that way. If you look, so remember, we're living through a growth of civilization period, and the shock of Donald Trump actually is also a great opportunity, just as Larry's talking about here, to really start, because we tend to be a bit lazy on these issues, that are kind of hard to figure out, and Larry's saying we can't do that anymore, and he's absolutely right. But if you look right to the top at the civilization and say, what's wrong with us? Actually, it's not that we're bad, or of course people taking money for stuff, that's very shabby, but it's this, that essentially our ethics are out of date. If you think about the rules of thumb, they all come from the great religions. If you think about the rules of thumb of Christianity, the Ten Commandments, and Christ's love one another addition, the rules of thumb have very short-term projection in time and space. They're meant to control the interactions between people who meet each other. However, science and technology have brought us unbelievable powers. That means I can sit here and talk to my former graduate student in India if I care to dial him up right now. And I can influence him. And somebody can sit somewhere and press a button and destroy a country on the other side of the world. We live in so what it reduces to, we know how to love the present. We know how to love our families. We know how to do the best for our communities. We don't know how to love the future. And so the big battle is between the near term and the long term. We have to advance in understanding how to love the future and to protect the long term and to prioritize the long term actually over the near term.
Well said. Okay, so I wanted to invite Steve to, if you have any further reflections as a filmmaker. You've heard some of the questions of the audience, what the panel has reflected on, some of the anxieties that folks have, and maybe in your work as a filmmaker, you may offer some thoughts to us about what we might consider doing.
Well, the one thing that occurs to me is, you know, our Louisiana story, it's taken a big turn for the worse. It's gotten some of the rollback, some of the environmental justice, and some of the momentum that these rural parishes had. It's not happening. And their new governor, Landry, I think is his name. You know, you've got people like Elon Musk putting untold money behind these elections, you know, so I keep going back to electoral reform, you know. But Landry, who's always been an oil and gas man, apparently, he got, maybe you read this, I think it was in the, yeah, $450,000 from one billionaire, and he's in the governor's office. And he's rolling back all this progress that had been made. It's over with for the time being, anyway. So it does, for me, I don't know how you get around that type of stuff without electoral reform. You know, if guys like Landry are running the show, what are we going to do about that? So I didn't really have anything to say besides pose another question.
That's a good question. Here for us in Pennsylvania, our governor just came out with a new budget. He labeled it something called his Lightning Plan, which is the fast-track development of new gas-fired power plants to meet the backlog that PJM has artificially created by not fast-tracking solar and wind like it should have been for the last 10 years. And they're using that as an excuse to try to subsidize additional gas-fired power plants. So one thing that everyone in this room can do is write to our governor and say, Governor Shapiro, we don't recognize you anymore. You were the one, as Attorney General, that indicted Equitrans, that did the Mariner East pipeline and called them out as a criminal enterprise. And you posed all sorts of guidelines for how to protect the health of Pennsylvania residents, but yet you're not following through with any of them as governor. And you're positioning yourself to run for president. You need to let our governor know that that's not acceptable. That we need to write to the governor and say, stop it. You should not be standing with the CEO of CNX Gas and doing a greenwashing commercial by saying that they're being transparent about how they operate, when actually they violate the law many, many times in their operations. And they're corrupting our governmental system. So we have to do that. Like, this is the hard work that people need to follow through with. By the way, we have a handout that you all can pick up on your way out that has no fewer than 7 things that you can be doing. That can start with participating in the Racial Justice Forum on February 22nd, coming to the Shale and Public Health Conference held at Duquesne University next Thursday, February 27th, cheering our youth on at the Youth Climate Summit on March 29th, and then attending the Solar Punk Future gathering that's happening also in early March. Sign for a fair public hearing. You can sign up for doing that. You can join BCMAC, the organization that Terrie helped found, and get lined up to give testimony because Shell has to renew their installation permits in May, and they need to ask for Title V operating permits in August. There's still a chance for people to show up and fight it and ask our DEP to say, don't give them that permit because they've broken their past permits so many times. You can tell Congress to stand up for itself. I think that's probably the number one thing. Our first branch of government is not doing its job right now. They're nowhere to be heard or seen right now. They're allowing the executive branch to run roughshod. Write to your congressperson and say, we want to hear from you. We want to see you stand up to what's going on there. And then stop Trump's plans to tear down the EPA. There's a link and a QR code to get a message sent to protect our EPA from the onslaught that's happening. And then there's a petition here in Allegheny County. We're lucky to have a local health regulator. Okay, there's a brand new board, a new board of health director who's motivated to protect our health. They need the funding to be able to do that. Write to your county council person and say, fund the bill, pass the ordinance that will allow the proper funding of our health department by charging the polluters the right fees for their permits. So there's a lot that we can be doing just in the next couple of days, and we can build from there.
Some of you may not know, the Allegheny County Health Department is our climate regulator for Allegheny County. So, and industrial pollution, like we saw there, is 40% of our climate emissions. And Pennsylvania being the number 4 climate emitter, Commonwealth state in the country, what we do, and Allegheny County, Philadelphia, what we do here in Allegheny County has nationwide climate implications. So that writing to our Allegheny County Health, or supporting the Allegheny Health Department has broad sweeping climate implications and public health implications. And if everyone here could turn out for public comments for the Shell permits that are coming up in April and July, follow BCMAC. They will lead. That would be fantastic because it does impact our airshed right here where we're standing. And the last thing I'll say is, this theater, the Harris Theater, is named for, we thought Teenie Harris, but no, there's another Harris, John Harris, who was one of the inventors of the movie theater. They called it the Nickelodeon, and the very first one, commercial movie theater, was a couple blocks from here. So this region has a history of innovation. Now, how that ties to the budget that the governor announced, you're going to see a lot of things, the sustainable aviation fuel, the AI data centers. These are like Trojan horses. They sound innovative, but they're really just new products for gas and fracking. And that's not the economy that we want. That's not the energy future that we want. That's not the health we want for our community members. So, yeah.
Absolutely false on the green plane fuel. Absolutely false.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest energy source in the universe, like our whole planet's solar powered, So, okay.
So
Solar power from many millennia ago.
Yeah.
And we're just puking it out into the air.
Yeah.
So the most important thing for acting is knowing the reason why to act. And I think right here with this panel and this film, we have a slam dunk case for why to act. We're right on the science. We're right on the ethics. We're right on the community wants and needs for the short term and the long term. We just need to be more active and have the courage to stand up to push for what's right. I read an Atlantic magazine article last week that raised the hair on the back of my neck. And it was about one of the ultra-conservative members of the German government who financed the Nazi Party. And their argument for how they did it was jobs, jobs, jobs. That was their core crux of their argument for how they got that done, because they thought it was a corruption scheme for getting money and making money off of it and selling it out, and it's the corporations that enabled that to happen. Now, I've got to be careful about how far we draw the analogy, but there are a lot of parallels. What we need to do is have the courage to stand up and say, jobs, jobs, jobs. It's more than that. It's community, it's togetherness, it's our future, it's the survival of the species, and we need to be able to say those things and get people motivated.
Can we run the slideshow again? Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So with that, I'll go ahead, Terrie, and then we're going to wrap up.
I was just going to say it'd be great if when this film comes out on PBS, if everybody here could have a watch party.
Yeah. We'll
Spread the
help
word.
organize that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let Breathe Project know when that date is going to be for, what is it, WHYY, is it?
It's WQED.
Oh, okay. I'll let you know when that date is. If they commit to an air date, hopefully it'll be during prime time. I'll let you know.
So I'd like to thank our panelists, Terrie Baumgartner, Ned Ketyer, Terrie Collins, and Larry Schwager. So thank you very much for your... I'd like to thank our sponsor organizations, Physicians for Social Responsibility PA, Three Rivers Waterkeeper, BC Mac, and Protect PT.
And Penn Future, too.
And Penn
Yes.
Future, too. And I want to thank our Breathe Project staff.
Thank you.
Phoebe, of course, and then Deb, and we have Ashlyn here, Joe, we've got Emily and Maxwell, and Natisha. So thank you to the Breathe Project team. And me, thanks. And then thanks to the Harris Theater and to, of course, Steve Cowan and Habitat Media. And we have a member of our county council here tonight who wants to say something, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a member of Allegheny County Council, and we are being urged by the County Health Department to increase the Title V permitting fees for the major polluters in this region, and you probably know who number one is. And if you'd like to help, I mean, we need 10 votes on council to make this happen. We need a supermajority. We have 8 votes, and we're frozen right now because 3 of my colleagues are up for re-election. And they're being urged by labor and industry, don't do it. Don't support this fee increase. So if you're at all interested, you can send emails. You can flood our email box at the Allegheny County Council. You can show up at our meetings. We'll give you the mic for 3 minutes. Our next meeting is on the 25th of this month, which is Tuesday. I'll be there. And just, contact our office. They'll put you on the agenda. And just flood the airwaves inside council. So thank you very much for that. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you all here for staying late tonight and being here. And the panel will be here for a few minutes.